Life has a strange way of teaching us lessons. Sometimes it whispers them gently in the quiet moments when no one else is watching, and other times, it hits us so hard that we're forced to stop, reflect, and ask ourselves, what am I really chasing? This story is about a man who thought money was everything, who believed that the more he earned, the more successful he became. But one moment, a single moment, changed everything he thought he knew about life. His name was Daniel. Daniel grew up in a small town, where every corner store owner, every neighbor, and even his parents measured a person's worth by the size of their paycheck and the kind of car parked in the driveway. From childhood, he was told that success meant financial security, wealth, and the admiration of others. His father often said, "Son, money is the language the world understands. If you have it, people listen. If you don't, you're invisible." Daniel carried those words with him like a compass, letting them guide every choice he made. By the time he was in his late 20s, Daniel had already achieved what many people only dreamed of. He worked tirelessly as an investment banker in a big city, where days blurred into nights, and weekends were just another opportunity to climb higher. The sacrifices he made were immense. He skipped family gatherings, ignored his health, and traded friendships for overtime hours at the office. Yet, in return, his bank account grew fatter, his suits sharper, and his apartment more luxurious. By society's standards, Daniel was winning. But here's the truth about chasing money: no matter how much you earn, it always whispers, "Not enough." And Daniel, blinded by ambition, never stopped to question what enough truly meant. One winter evening, after closing one of the biggest deals of his career, Daniel found himself walking down a crowded city street. Snowflakes danced in the cold air, and the festive lights of the season decorated the buildings. People laughed, carrying gifts, holding hands, sipping hot drinks as they hurried home to loved ones. Daniel, in his tailored coat and polished shoes, walked alone. He told himself it didn't matter, because unlike them, he was successful. Unlike them, he had money. As he approached a small corner, he noticed a young boy, no older than 10, standing with his mother beside a food cart. Their clothes were old and worn, the kind you could tell had been patched more than once. The boy's eyes sparkled with excitement as he pointed to a simple cup of hot chocolate. His mother reached into her pocket, counted a few coins, and then, with a smile that lit up her tired face, bought it for him. The boy held the cup like it was the greatest treasure in the world, sipping it slowly, savoring every drop. Daniel froze. He could have bought that food cart 10 times over. He could have ordered the entire menu without blinking. But he realized something unsettling. He hadn't felt that kind of joy in years. That boy, with nothing but a paper cup in his hands, looked richer than Daniel had ever felt. For the first time, Daniel questioned himself. Was this it? Was this what all the years of grinding, sacrificing, and chasing were for? A bank account full of numbers but a heart running on empty. He walked on, but the image of the boy and his mother stayed with him like a shadow. That night, Daniel returned to his apartment, a sleek, modern space with expensive art on the walls and gadgets in every room. Yet, despite all the luxury, the silence was deafening. He heated a meal, but it tasted bland. He poured a glass of wine, but it didn't comfort him. He sat by the window, looking down at the bustling streets, and realized he was surrounded by millions of people, yet utterly alone. That was the moment. The moment he realized success wasn't about money. But realization alone isn't enough, it demands action. Daniel knew he had to do something that would prove to himself that he was more than just his paycheck. The next morning, instead of rushing to the office, he took a different path. He returned to that same street corner, hoping to see the boy and his mother again. But they weren't there. Instead, he noticed a small shelter nearby, with a sign that read, "Warm meals, open hearts, donations welcome." Curious, Daniel stepped inside. The room was filled with people, families, the elderly, children, all gathered to share a meal. Volunteers moved gracefully, serving food with genuine smiles, their faces glowing with purpose. Daniel felt something stir inside him, a mix of humility and longing. A woman at the counter greeted him warmly and asked if he'd like to help. For reasons he couldn't explain, Daniel said yes. That afternoon, he served soup, carried trays, and sat down to listen to stories of people who had far less than him but somehow seemed far richer in spirit. One old man, with lines of hardship etched across his face, told Daniel, "Son, I've lost money more times than I can count. But I've never lost myself, and that's why I keep going." Those words cut deep. Daniel realized he had done the opposite. He had kept the money but lost himself somewhere along the way. Walking home later, Daniel felt lighter. He didn't check his phone for emails. He didn't think about the stock market. For once, he thought about people, about life, about meaning. That night, sleep came easier than it had in years. But this was only the beginning. Because when you've spent your entire life chasing the wrong definition of success, it takes time and courage to rewrite the script. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual. His alarm hadn't rung yet, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel the crushing weight of dread about the day ahead. Instead, there was a quiet curiosity in his heart. The memory of the shelter, the warmth, the laughter, the simple joy of sharing food, pulled him out of bed faster than any meeting or deadline ever had. He brewed his coffee, but this time he didn't gulp it down in a rush. He sat at the table, staring at the steam rising from the cup, and let his thoughts wander. For so long, he had been sprinting forward, chasing promotion after promotion, bonus after bonus, never once pausing to ask, why? Why did he want so much money? Why did he think success had to be measured in numbers? Daniel realized he didn't have an answer. Or worse, the answer was empty, because everyone else said so. That morning, instead of heading straight to the office, Daniel went back to the shelter. The woman he had met the day before, her name was Maria, smiled when she saw him. "Back so soon?" she asked. Daniel chuckled. "Yeah. I guess something about this place stuck with me." Maria handed him an apron. "Then let's put you to work again." And so he spent the next few hours chopping vegetables, washing dishes, and serving meals. At first, he felt awkward. This wasn't the Daniel people in the corporate world knew, the sharp, confident banker who walked into meetings with authority. Here, he was just another pair of hands. But the more he worked, the lighter he felt. He noticed the gratitude in the eyes of those he served, the way a simple meal could bring relief to someone who had struggled all day. During a short break, Daniel sat with a young man named Eric, who had once been a promising college student but had lost everything after a series of bad choices. Eric didn't complain, didn't ask for pity. He simply said, "I thought money would solve my problems, but money without purpose is like water in your hands. It slips away, and you're still thirsty." Daniel nodded, stunned. That single line summed up the very thing he had been wrestling with. Money without purpose. That had been his life, collecting wealth without any real meaning. Later that day, Daniel reluctantly left the shelter to head to work. He walked into the glass skyscraper where he spent most of his life and suddenly noticed details he had never paid attention to before. The forced smiles. The endless stress etched into people's faces. The constant race to impress superiors and outdo peers. He realized it wasn't just him. Everyone here was running on the same treadmill, chasing the same illusion of success. For the first time, Daniel felt out of place in a world he had once fought so hard to belong to. That evening, after a long day of meetings and numbers, he sat in his office, staring at the city lights outside. His phone buzzed with congratulatory messages about another successful deal, but they felt hollow. He thought about Eric's words. He thought about the boy with the hot chocolate. He thought about Maria and the volunteers at the shelter. And a strange idea began to grow inside him. What if success had nothing to do with how much money you made, but everything to do with how much life you touched? It was a frightening thought. Because if that were true, then Daniel, despite all his wealth, wasn't successful at all. The following weekend, instead of retreating into luxury, Daniel went back to the shelter again. This time, he stayed longer. He asked Maria about how the place was run, how it was funded, and what challenges they faced. She explained that donations were scarce, volunteers were few, and yet the need kept growing. Something stirred deep inside Daniel, a mix of empathy and responsibility. He had resources, connections, skills. He had the very things the shelter lacked. For the first time, he saw his wealth not as a trophy to show off, but as a tool to be used. The shift was subtle but powerful. The more time he spent at the shelter, the more he understood the richness of giving. Every smile he saw, every thank you he received, filled a void inside him that no paycheck ever had. He began to see life in contrasts, his expensive dinners that left him unsatisfied versus the simple soup that brought joy to those who had nothing. His penthouse view that felt lonely versus the crowded shelter that felt alive with community. Slowly, Daniel started to change. He still worked at his job, but he no longer lived for it. He stopped chasing promotions for the sake of status. Instead, he began setting aside time and money for things that actually mattered. He supported the shelter, funded their expansion, and even brought some of his colleagues to volunteer with him. At first, they mocked him, saying he had gone soft. But then, as they experienced it themselves, they too began to question their definition of success. One night, Daniel walked home from the shelter, the winter air crisp against his face. He felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from doing something meaningful. As he passed by the same corner where he had first seen the boy with the hot chocolate, he smiled. That moment had been a mirror, showing him the emptiness of his path. Now, he was walking a different one that felt heavier with responsibility but lighter on his soul. Success, he realized, wasn't about being admired from afar. It was about being remembered up close. Not for the size of your wallet, but for the size of your heart. That realization began to transform Daniel's entire outlook. He was no longer racing against others. He was building something deeper, a legacy rooted not in numbers, but in impact. And though the world still praised him for his financial success, Daniel now knew the truth: real success had never been about money at all. Months passed, and Daniel's life continued to shift in ways he never imagined. His colleagues noticed he was different, less tense, less restless, and far more present. The man who once skipped family gatherings for late-night meetings was now the one leaving the office on time. The man who once measured every decision in dollars now measured it in meaning. Yet, with this transformation came a question that haunted him: had he wasted all those years? He thought of the endless nights, the sacrifices, the friendships lost to ambition. But Maria reminded him one evening, as they cleaned up the shelter, every road, even the wrong ones, teaches you something. Without your old life, you wouldn't have the skills or resources to help us now. Don't regret the path. Use it. Those words anchored him. He began to see his wealth not as a symbol of greed but as a second chance to do good. One day, he invited his father, a retired teacher, to the shelter. The old man had always worried about Daniel's obsession with money, though he rarely said it directly. When his father saw Daniel serving meals, talking with people, and laughing freely, his eyes filled with pride. Later, he put a hand on his son's shoulder and whispered, "Now, I finally see you succeeding." That sentence stayed with Daniel. His father had never congratulated him for the promotions, the houses, or the cars. But this act of giving, was the moment his father called him successful. And for Daniel, that was worth more than any award or bonus. As time went on, Daniel decided to expand his involvement. He didn't just donate money, he built programs. He started a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids, helped create job training workshops, and partnered with local businesses to provide steady employment for those who visited the shelter. What had started as a small curiosity had grown into a movement, touching hundreds of lives. And here was the irony: the more Daniel gave, the richer he felt. Not in his bank account, but in his spirit. The emptiness that once consumed him was gone, replaced by a deep satisfaction that no luxury item had ever provided. Of course, not everyone understood. Some friends drifted away, unable to relate to his new priorities. Others accused him of trying to buy redemption. But Daniel no longer cared about pleasing everyone. He had finally found a compass stronger than public opinion, his own inner voice. One winter evening, as snow fell gently outside, Daniel sat in the shelter with a group of children. They were drawing pictures with crayons donated by volunteers. One little girl proudly held up her drawing, a simple picture of a man handing food to others, smiling wide. She looked at him and said, "That's you." Daniel felt his throat tighten. All the titles, degrees, and deals of his life had never defined him the way that child's drawing did in that moment. He realized that this was what legacy meant. Not being remembered for the money you made, but for the lives you touched. The transformation wasn't about rejecting money altogether. Daniel still worked, still earned. But money was no longer the destination, it was the vehicle. A tool to create opportunities, to bring light where there was darkness. Years later, when people spoke about Daniel, they rarely mentioned his career. They spoke about the shelter programs, the kids who went to college because of his scholarships, the families who rebuilt their lives with his support. They spoke about the men who once thought success was about climbing higher than everyone else but later discovered success was about lifting others with him. And the beautiful irony. In the end, Daniel had achieved more recognition, love, and fulfillment than he ever did in the boardrooms of skyscrapers. Not because of his wealth, but because of the way he used it. His story became a quiet reminder to all who heard it. Chasing money alone leads to emptiness, but chasing meaning creates abundance beyond measure. So, if you're listening to this now, ask yourself the same question Daniel once faced: what does success mean to you? Is it the numbers in your account, or the stories in people's hearts when they speak your name? Because one day, long after the money is spent and the trophies are forgotten, what will remain is the impact you made, the kindness you gave, and the difference you created in the lives of others. That is the moment you will realize, just like Daniel did, that success was never about money at all.